Yes. Okay.
All right. Well, because there's been some questions about right view, and in fact, it's a really important point. I thought that we would talk about number 117 in the Majjhima Nikaya. It's called the Mahācattārīsaka Sutta, which means the Great 40. And we're going to be talking about the Eightfold Noble Path here, or at least in this talk, we'll talk about the first part of it. But 40 doesn't divide into 8 equally. There's something amiss immediately. But later on in the sutta, we find that as the Eightfold Noble Path becomes complete, 2 additional items are added to the list. And that is the 2 that we've talked about before. That is knowledge of the path and deliverance.
Deliverance, yeah.
Knowledge and deliverance, which are the 2 aspects that are the goal of the Anapanasati Sutta. And so in that regard, you can see that the knowledge and deliverance is what the Buddha really is teaching when he talks about that what I teach is dukkha nirodha, or the end of suffering, is the deliverance from suffering. First we have the knowledge of suffering, and then deliverance of suffering. Well, when we talk about it in the sense of knowledge, it sounds, especially to Westerners and some Christians, to be a completely depressing religion. You know, that we're on about suffering, and we're on about extinction and emptiness and all of these bad things. But basically what we're talking about is to become empty of the things that cause suffering. That is really not a teaching about suffering, it's a teaching about how to come out of it. And that we have both path and we have application, or the techniques. So the techniques or the tools that we're going to use is the Anapanasati practice. And that the tool of the Anapanasati practice then is for the path itself.
Right.
All right. Now, the path is normally divided into 2 groups, though nowhere in the suttas you can see that distinction. So let me draw it for you clearly. There are basically 2 kinds of people that come to the teaching of the Buddha. Those that fully understand it, and those who don't understand it yet. Those are the 2 groups, okay? Basically would be the Puthajjana, those that are unskilled in the teaching of the Buddha. Now, unknowledgeable or unskilled does not mean that they have no even an introductory level. Okay, it's okay to have a good introductory or even a solid foundation of Buddhism. But unless you have real skill in it, you're still an unskilled ordinary person, which is the way that most born Buddhists wind up being. You could almost go so far as to say is the group of people who have Buddhism as a religion, and then you have the nobles who have Buddhism as a lifestyle. Okay?
Okay, yeah.
All right. So that means that if each one of these 2 groups is going to be practicing the Eightfold Path, then the path that they're taking is actually going to have a distinction in it, so that the ones who are unskilled are on an ordinary path, but those who have attained the Arya state or the nobility, they actually have a noble path.
Right.
All right. The unnoble path is listed and labeled in the following way. It's labeled as Sila, Samadhi, Panya, to where Sila is the beginning.
Morality,
okay,
yeah.
This is where you start with children. You teach them to behave themselves. You teach them about karma. And if you're not teaching about a law of karma, you're teaching about if you don't behave yourself, Daddy's going to beat you, you know. And so the cause and effect relationship is pretty well taught into children about the concept of virtue. So this is the beginning stage of virtue. And then the second stage is the practice of meditation, concentration or samadhi,
Yeah.
and that leads to wisdom. Okay? And
Right.
yet when you look at the Eightfold Noble Path, as it's stated right here in this scripture and in many other places, right view is first. And so on the Noble Path, it goes not sila, samadhi, panya. It goes samadhi. It goes panya, sila, samadhi. Why? Because right view drives everything.
Right.
On the noble level. Okay, so now let's go in and start the sutta. Thus heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One living at Saravathi and Jeta's Grove and Anthropopithecus Park there, he addressed the bhikkhus thus, "Bhikkhus, venerable sir," they replied, "Bhikkhus, I shall teach you noble right concentration with its supports and requisites." Okay. Well, normally when we talk about the Eightfold Noble Path, we always go for view, attitude, and then you go into the sila of right action, right speech, right lifestyle, then into mindfulness, energy, and then concentration is last. So
Right.
the Buddha is talking about this. I shall teach you the right noble concentration with its supports and requisites, which means that the Eightfold Noble Path actually is a sevenfold Noble Path that are supports and requisites for right noble concentration. That's the way of looking at it, okay? That in fact, in this sutta, the Buddha doesn't even bother to get around to talking about noble concentration because he's really wanting to talk about the supports and requisites.
Okay.
Listen and attend closely to what I shall say. Yes, venerable sir. What, bhikkhus, is noble right concentration with its supports and requisites? And that is 1. Right view. 2. Right intention. 3. Right speech. Right action. Right livelihood. Right effort. And right mindfulness. Then he says, unification of mind equipped with these 7 factors is called noble right concentration with its supports and requisites. Okay, let's get that. The unification of mind, which is equipped with these 7 other factors, is called noble right concentration with its supports and requisites. So right noble concentration, not right noble concentration unless it has these right kinds of supports and requisites to it.
Okay.
All right. Therefore, bhikkhus, right view comes first. One of the ways that we teach Buddhism, the way we teach our children, we don't teach right view comes first. We teach an ordinary kind of religious view of Buddhism that starts with virtue as first. That's why we give the 5 precepts so early. You know, they have this little ritual. You become a Buddhist by doing Buddham Saranam Gacchami 3 times, Dhammam Saranam Gacchami, and Sangham Saranam Gacchami. And then the next thing we do is the 5 precepts. So we start them in virtue. And yet the Buddha is clearly here saying that, therefore, bhikkhus, right view comes first. Because this is at the noble path. It's not the ordinary path, and that's an important distinction, that we're not on a path of sila, samadhi, panya. We're on a path of panya, sila, samadhi. Once we learn this. But where does that change occur? It occurs with what we call a change of lineage. When we're no longer an ordinary person and now we become noble, basically because we understand at deep level personality view, that there is no self. And because there is no self, that means that now we can fully understand what the path is really about. that we had the Eightfold Path before, but now that we have the full deep understanding of what no self is, we can see it in relationship to the path. And so now we finally and fully understand the path, and we finally and figure it out that we know the path without doubt, that we have the knowledge and vision of what is the path and knowledge and vision of what is not the path. And we also know that that what is not the path is all the rites, rules, rituals, and everything that every religion does, from funerals to taking Jesus as your Savior, to sitting meditation rituals, to chanting, to prayer. None of those things are going to get you enlightened, but the Eightfold Noble Path will.
Right.
Okay? So, we also learned that not only do positive rituals work, obeying negative laws, in the sense that if you don't do this, or if you do this thing, we're going to punish you. You see, positive rituals are, if you do this, you will get some reward in the future. Negative laws are, if you do this, you're going to get punished in the future. We also see that that's false too, that these laws, rules, and rituals are only punishment because someone holds a grudge against us, not because of some karma machine.
Right.
Okay, so, and how does right view come first? One understands wrong view is wrong view and right view is right view. This is what's one's right view. Now, that's a little hard to understand or fathom, but the Buddha is saying that what you have to do is you'll understand what right view is. And what is the way to understand what is right view is to also understand what is wrong view. Okay. And so now he's going to give us a whole list of what is wrong view, or what is possibly wrong view. Don't get attached to any particular one. There is no item on this list that has any particular value. It's just a list of stuff that the Buddha talks about in the sense of wrong view. Okay?
Okay.
There is nothing given. There is nothing offered. There is nothing sacrificed. No fruit are the result of good and bad actions. In other words, you can see that there are some people who say that there's no reason to be generous. There's no reason to sacrifice anything. Okay? No results of good or bad actions. In other words, they're just claiming no karma. No this world, no other world, no mother, no father, no beings who are reborn spontaneously, no good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins in the world who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge and declare the world and the other world. This is wrong view. So basically what he's saying is that when we get into a state of denying things, the denial, whatever it is, we deny it or we say no to it. This is a kind of a wrong view. And what, bhikkhus, is right view? Right view, I say, is twofold. There is right view that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, ripens on the side of clinging or attachment. And there is right view that is noble, taintless, supramundane, and a factor of the path. So there's two different kinds of right views. The first right view is the ordinary Christian or Buddhist religious right view. And then there is the wrong view would be kind of the nihilist or the atheist or the denier's view.
Right.
Okay. And then there's a second kind of right view, and that's the right view of the noble. And what, bhikkhus, is right view that is affected by taints, partaking of merit, ripens on the side of attachment? There is what is given, what is offered, what is sacrificed. There is the fruit and the results of good and bad actions. There is this world and the other world. There is mother, there is father. There are beings who were reborn spontaneously. By the way, the word reborn here is Bhikkhu Bodhi's word. That's not in the actual Pali. The word jati, and it just means who are spontaneously born. There are in the world good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins who realize for themselves by direct knowledge and declare this world and the other world. This is right view affected by taint, taking of merit, and ripens on the side of attachment. Okay, so the no side of the fence is wrong view, but the yes side of the fence is a right view, but it's still loaded down with suffering. It still ripens on the side of attachment. And what, bhikkhus, is right view that is noble, taintless, supermundane, and a factor of the path? There is the wisdom, the faculty of wisdom, the power of wisdom, the investigation of states enlightenment factor, the path factor of right view in one whose mind is noble. You know what that means? Whose mind is taintless, means free from hindrance, who possesses the noble path and is developing the noble path. This is right view that the noble, taintless, supermundane, and a factor of the path. Now, the first several years that I read that, I was actually not happy with it, because the Buddha never gives a right view.
Right.
What he does say, though, that what your right view should be is investigation. That in fact, that going back to the Anapanasati Sutta, we have the path factor of right view winds up being the very investigation factor that we build mindfulness for in order to develop the investigation factor. Okay? That is what one's right view is. So we wind up saying that there's no reason to ever come to a conclusion.
Right.
But what we can do is that we can recognize that there is one, evidence in this case, and two, lack of evidence in this case. And that people who cling to those ideas where they have no evidence are just merely clinging. And in fact, when you hold views without evidence, that's real clinging, to where if you hold views that have evidence, you don't have to hold that view very strong, because it's already got its own strength of evidence. That you really, in order to hold a view, you have to hold a view that cannot support itself, has no evidence for it. That's what a real view is. And whether that view is right or wrong is irrelevant. The point is that it ripens in clinging.
Okay.
That's the big issue. And so any views that we hold will wind up, regardless of what it is, will harm us, because it needs a self. We have to develop a self in order to develop clinging, in order to hold a view. But if the views are not important, then there's no real clinging to be done. This is one's liberation. And the support of that is back to the Chula Singhanada Sutta number 11. Let's get that one out, where the Buddha is saying the same thing, but in a slightly different way. Bhikkhus, there are these two views, the view of being and the view of non-being. Okay, basically this is also the same two views as wrong view and ordinary right view. In other words, one is saying there's a God and there's not a God, or there's a self and not a self, or whatever like this. But anytime you hold one side or the other of the arguments, any recluse or Brahmin who rely on the view of being, adopt the view of being, accept the view of being, are opposed to the view of non-being. Any recluse or Brahmin who rely on the view of non-being, adapt the view of non-being, accept the view of non-being, are opposed to the view of being. So that means that if you hold one view, then you reject the other. And if you hold this view, you reject that one. This was actually formalized in the time of the Buddha. in the sense that whenever people would get into arguments in formal settings, they would always talk about this view is right and other views are wrong. It's very much like politicians. I'm the only guy for the office and all these other guys are wrong, you see. And so this is how we set up with these views. Whatever view I hold to means that this view has more value than other views. Most people are smart enough not to hold contradictory views, but when people say they're open, like people say that they're open to creationism, all that means is that please don't bend over, because that openness, you may lose what knowledge you've got if you bend over. You don't want to be that kind of open in the sense of you don't want to be open to things that have no evidence. You want to be open to evidence, not beliefs.
Okay.
Because evidence is real. Evidence is fact. Evidence is, this is it. Evidence is ta-ta-ta, living in reality. This is our goal or our aim, and that if we don't have evidence to support our beliefs, then don't do the support of those beliefs ourselves. So, let me turn the light on here because it's gotten kind of dark and hard to read. Okay. Any recluse or Brahmin who do not understand as they actually are the origins, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these two views are affected by lust, affected by hate, affected by delusion, affected by craving, affected by clinging, without vision, given to favoring and opposing, and they delight in and enjoy proliferation. As you know, I mean, look at what most beliefs become an entire belief system. Look how complicated Christianity has become over the centuries. Why? Because the mind delights in proliferation. They are not freed from birth, aging, death, and sorrow, lamentation, grief, and despair. They are not freed from suffering, I say. Okay, let's go back and read something else. Any recluse or Brahmin who does not understand as they actually are the origin of beliefs, the disappearance of beliefs, the gratification of beliefs. In other words, if you begin to understand beliefs, you also understand why we are gratified by holding these beliefs. One reason is that it supports the self. It supports our fear of death. Doesn't support the fear. What it supports is release from the fear of death. That's one of the ways that our beliefs will gratify us. But we also need to see the danger in these beliefs and then the escape from them. Any recluse or Brahmin who understands as they really are the origin, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these two views is without lust, without hate, without delusion, without craving, without clinging, with vision, not given to favoring or opposing, and they do not delight in and enjoy proliferation. In other words, kiss it, keep it simple. They are free from birth, aging, death, views, sorrow, lamentation, grief, pain, and despair. They are freed from suffering, I say. And now the big one, the big clincher. Bhikkhus, there are 4 kinds of clinging. What for? Clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rules and observances, and clinging to a doctrine of self. Now, in other suttas, these 4 things are actually called underlying tendencies, but here the Buddha is talking about them in the sense of 4 modes of clinging. And that you'll notice that this one that he was harping on about the 2 views of yes or no is just one of these views, the view of clinging, and then the views of rules and observances. Now, one of the things that I've come to understand for myself, it's kind of a map that I use, it's very handy, is to understand these 4 underlying tendencies the way that the scientists understand the 4 basic instincts. You have the self-preservation instinct. You have the procreation instinct. You have the nesting instinct. And then you have the territorial instinct. Have you heard of these four together as a group?
I have not. No.
Okay. Well, these are the four that fit correctly with the teaching of the Buddha, in the sense that we normally, the nest is probably the most difficult to understand, in the sense that we have things called home rule or homeland security. This is our nesting instinct is where our desire for order, our desire for rules and observances and all that kind of stuff comes from. It has to do with an orderliness. And if you sleep with a lot of dogs, you know that that's even necessary within a pack of dogs. So that everyone becomes comfortable while they're sleeping at night.
Yeah.
So the nesting instinct gives rise into eventually the father wanting to control his children. He makes rules for them. Or that the head man of a village starts making rules in order to control other people, in order for him to feel powerful. So feelings of power or feelings of security are also wrapped up with this concept of the nest. To where it's a little bit different than procreation, because how we get procreation confused, or we have a lot of ignorance about it, is generally we think of sexuality or lust as some sort of gratification of feeling. But throughout our history of humanity, sensuality or lust has had to do with ownership and control, especially of men over women. Just as you have a cartoon of the caveman with a club over his shoulder dragging the female who's unconscious behind him, you know that this is called ancient dating. But in modern times, you see the guy in his pajamas with a big heavy beard with an AK-47 over his shoulder dragging a woman behind him in a burqa. But it's the same thing. It has to do with control. It has to do with gratification that has a control issue to it. And this is why materialism is wrapped up with sensuality. That we think that if we own something, that it will take care of us and give us gratification. So we have this whole quality of ownership. Ownership and control then have to do with sensuality, to where the nesting instinct has to do with the security that we have through making rules. To where at a greater group, out to the tribal level, or the territory that we have, mostly how we, real territory is taken care of, not only here in Thailand, but in England and in the United States. The territory is marked by boundaries with maps that are on record down at the county courthouse. And so land disputes or real territorial disputes have more or less been solved because of the ability to keep records and the ability to define things and then leave them that way unless there's a sale of the land or whatever. However, within the context of an underlying tendency or an instinct, the territory becomes my mental territory. It becomes my belief system. So that what I believe defines who I am, and it not only defines who I am, but it defines my clan, because my clan also shares that belief system.
All right.
All right. So if I then have conflict, the conflict will be from people who have different beliefs. Now, territories, real territories that have, with land, the territories don't mix together too well. Physical land being what his nature is. However, ideas do move around quite a bit. They're more air because they're mental objects. And yet we attach to them and cling to them the same way that we would attach to a territory, in the sense that anybody who comes in and invades my territory, which means contradicts my beliefs, and we've got to rally the troops. We got to, have arguments or fights or whatever like this. This is the cause of suffering, is because I have staked out a territory of beliefs. But if I keep no beliefs, then I have no reason to suffer from holding beliefs.
Right.
But the reason that we hold beliefs is because we see some gratification in those beliefs. And that one of the primary gratifications that people get from beliefs is a sense of security. That I accept Jesus as my Savior, and therefore I am saved, and I feel secure because of that. And yet, because of the proliferation associated with that, people then begin to lose that security, because they also see that taking Jesus as their Savior did not, it might have forgiven their sins, but it didn't teach them how to stop the sin. That in fact we have to go actually to the teachings of the Buddha to find out how to stop sin.
Right.
And that we don't stop sin by keeping rules. Rules are an indication, but it's not the final arbiter of what sin is. That in fact we could go back to the basic teaching of the Buddha of what sin is causing suffering. Therefore, if you're going to not cause suffering, then that makes you sin-free.
Okay.
Okay, that makes really good sense. So, these four modes of clinging are unique to the Buddha. All the other religions will have only bits and pieces of these things. Mostly religions will talk about the procreation instinct, and that they will talk about being down on materialism. They want, for instance, their monks to go into monasteries and take vows of poverty and silence, and to become non-materialistic. But also religions are very, very, very hard on sexuality or sensuality. So this is one place where most religions do understand the nature of suffering, because you can face it, in the old days, sex had a lot of danger associated with it. Had a lot of danger. Women would die in childbirth. That we didn't understand about the germ quality of disease. And so disease associated with sensuality was rampant. And that most women would have a very painful or difficult pregnancy. The childbearing and infant mortality and all of that kind of stuff was wrapped up in sensuality in the old days that we don't have now. That most of the real suffering, most of the real problems associated with sensuality and sexuality have been solved, because they were real problems caused by real issues that real science has been able to finish off. But what we haven't dealt with is the mental stuff about jealousy, envy, because we still want to hold ownership over another person.
Right.
You're looking even in the wedding ceremonies, to have and to hold, to cling to the whole concept is to give security, but it doesn't. It doesn't give security. That what gives security is that the man and the woman are compatible and get along with each other and are mutually beneficial for each other. If there comes a time when the man and the woman are not mutually beneficial for each other, that partnership will dissolve naturally.
Okay.
And that in the really, really old days, let us say prehistoric days, that scientists have come to understand that men and women didn't form long-term relationships automatically. That men and women would come together for a certain period of time that was based, I guess, on lust or power or control. But by the time that a child is 3 or 4 or 5 years old, the mother doesn't need the dad around anymore. She can regain her independence once her kid is old enough to go forage for himself or whatever. Okay,
Right.
so the dependency that a woman will feel towards a man. Let me turn this light off now. The dependency that a woman would feel towards a man wanes over time. And so the relationship has to have more to it than what was there originally.
Okay.
And that's part of nature. When that is gone, there has to be some other way or some other method or bonding, which can be either wholesome and beneficial or unwholesome. There are unwholesome reasons why people will stay together. But long-term relationships are almost demanded by various religions, to where within nature they're not so. That what the Buddha would recommend instead is that each human would be autonomous and on their own. That he accepted women into the Sangha as well as men. Now, as far as sexuality goes, in the time of the Buddha, they had all the problems attendant with the suffering of sexuality that existed in primitive times. And that not only that, but there was a huge amount of social mores that were already built into the culture that the Buddha lived in. And that
Right.
all of the religious groups that had people, because there was a lot of meditators back then. It was sort of a spiritual revolution, and most of them were who would go off and live the life of the hermit, or live the life of seclusion, live the life of a bhikkhu or a recluse. They would do so without a sexual partner. And so getting over sexuality was a part of the Buddhist practice that's not necessary so much today if we have a different culture, because in fact the Western culture doesn't support celibacy, because most of the reasons for it are no longer valid.
Right.
The woman is not necessarily in danger of becoming pregnant. That's up to her now, because she has control over that. That people are not susceptible to gaining disease, that there are things that can be done to control that. And modern people know this. And so the taboo of pure sexuality is not as strong in modern times. And that we need to work with that within the context of Buddhism, to downplay the issue of the sexual aspect of this, and start playing up and working on the materialism, because that's what's destroying the planet Earth. It's that yes, we have had issues with overpopulation, but overpopulation was not caused by sexuality. Overpopulation was caused, in fact, by the World Health Organization being able to put a stop to infant mortality, or putting a decline on it. But every culture that's experienced a decline in infant mortality has also showed a significant decrease in birth rate. That women had a lot of children for two reasons. One is that they were out of control. And they needed the children because their other children would probably die. Now that neither one of those things are true, except where religion gets in, and you can see where religion with their beliefs are actually causing a tremendous amount of suffering by not recognizing the world's sexuality as it is currently. They want to keep putting old rules onto a new culture, and that the religions themselves are suffering over this because the people are rejecting those old rules. Many people are rejecting the Catholic Church's teaching on contraceptive because they recognize that contraception is beneficial to the individual, even if it's detrimental to the Catholic Church.
Right.
But that the Catholic Church should not be so selfish. They should be actually looking out for their constituency, not for the priesthood. And so people are also having trouble with the church because of that issue that's very tightly wrapped up with the issues of contraception and sexuality. So all the other religions understand this. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was very much on the issue of materialism, but he didn't speak too much about sexuality because in modern times, actual sexuality is not nearly the kind of trouble and problem that it was in the old days, but materialism is a first-class problem now. Materialism is causing global warming. Materialism is causing the greed. That's in fact where the greed is, that Paul in a way was right when he says the love of money is the root of all evil, when the only other possibility would be the love of the body of whoever I'm lusting after is the root of all evil. But he didn't say that. No, it really is money, or in that sense, materialism. But materialism is wrapped up directly with sensuality.
Right.
And so whenever you see sensuality in Buddhist context, don't think of sexuality, rather think of materialism, because that's the real issue. It's ownership and control, but our ownership and control for the other person has been, let us say, partially or almost completely healed. But our relationship with the material world is still very sick, in the sense that we identify with merchandise, we identify with brand, we identify with our material world. That the idea for the wealthy is he who dies with the most toys wins, and that the accumulation of wealth is let us say, substituted then for the pursuit of happiness, that people no longer pursue happiness. What we pursue is materialism, thinking that materialism will make us happy. But within the context of what the Buddha is teaching, oh no, no, no. It's the fact that we're out of control of our feelings is what gives rise to this issue of materialism, that if when we learn to control our feelings so that we can gain our own happiness, then we can see immediately that materialism doesn't hold for us the allure that it once had. So we stop clinging to this. Now, this fourth mode of clinging that's associated here with these things is the doctrine of self. Now, when we say the doctrine of self, we're actually talking here about the doctrines that the Brahmins were teaching about a permanent self, or a self that was atomic, an atom, or a atta that was strong and sophisticated and survived death, and that not only was strong enough to survive death, but was complicated enough for identification. In other words, if it were something like a Higgs boson or an electron or an atom that was the self that was expelled by the body at death, that atom doesn't hold enough information. Look at what, 7 billion people, the big karma machine in the sky needs to be able to identify you in order to track not only your behaviors, but who it is that's going to receive the benefits of those behaviors, right? And so this is where that belief in the doctrine of self comes from. and that if you go to Varanasi, it's a really beautiful experience to go see lines and lines and lines of people. Sometimes the lines are hundreds of people long. All of them are waiting to die, and then instead of first come, first serve, it's more like who dies first gets served first. But in order to get into line, you have to show them that you've got the money to give to the Brahmins so that they will do the funeral for you on the Ganges. And during that funeral process of the burning, they'll take a shillelagh or a wood that's got a big gnarl on the end of it and whack the skull at just the right moment. And they know this because this is their business, so that the skull will spew out not a lot of brain matter, but it's boiling hot, and it is a lot of steam. And so we talk about that steam, and they do this with great ritual, as if this is releasing the soul. That steam that comes up is actually the soul that the Hindus are releasing. Okay, so these belief systems were the part and parcel of the kind of belief system that people had when they came to the Buddha. And so you can see where a lot of these beliefs have gotten kind of stuck to the teaching of the Buddha, where in fact the real teaching of the Buddha teaches against this doctrine of self.
Right.
However, these other three modes of clinging also have self built into it, because without a self, there's no clinging.
Right.
And so if we're clinging to rites, rules, and rituals, then that's the self that's clinging to them. If we're clinging to materialism, that's the kind of self that's clinging to that. Well, guess what? According to this kind of way of looking at things, the self that clings to the car or the material object is not the same kind of self that clings to views. And that's also not the same kind of self that clings to rites, rules, and rituals. That the rites, rules, and rituals guy is clinging to it as a survival issue, to where the guy who is clinging to the car in order to get a good wife is looking for it in the sense of power. It's a different kind of self. Okay, so you have the three kinds of selves that are built into this system, as well as the doctrine of self that is promoted by the Brahmins. All of these have to do then back with right view, that when we are actually capable of right view, then we drop all of our views. But at that same time, this is the path that we come to of the state of Sotapan, is when we recognize the doctrine of self is wrong, that clinging to materialism is wrong, that clinging to rites, rules, observances, and rituals is wrong, and clinging to views is all wrong. That these all four are modes of clinging and forms of suffering. And that when we come to that, then we understand what really is the right path. And so the right path is starting with the right view, and that right view is to be free from all speculative views. That in fact, if you've got evidence for something, that's not a view, or that's not a belief, that's knowledge.
Right.
That's reality. You've got proof. There it is, okay? It's right in front of you. You lay it out. It can be taken to court. You can take it to the bank, as they say. But that speculative views are views because they've got no evidence and they need clinging as support for them.
Right.
And so this is what is one's right view, is to stay at the level of investigation, to stay at the level of wisdom, and to stay then at a level that, if we go back then to the sutta, we can end it off with this particular part, and that is, turn the light back on so I can read this because it's dark. One makes an effort to abandon wrong view and to enter upon right view. This is one's right effort. Isn't that amazing? That's what the Buddha teaches. Look how much effort is put into sitting meditation.
Yeah.
And that's not the right effort. What the right effort is that the Buddha is teaching is that one makes an effort to abandon wrong view and enter upon right view. This is one's right effort. Mindfully, one abandons wrong view. Mindfully, one enters upon and abides in right view. This is one's right mindfulness. Thus, these three states run and circle around right view, and that is right view, right effort, right mindfulness. Okay, so this is now three of the aspects of the Eightfold Noble Path, of right view, right effort, and right mindfulness. And in fact, you could also add right intention or right thought in that regard right there. Because the intention is, as well as right view, is to eliminate wrong view and to enter upon a right view that doesn't have any particular right view.
Okay.
And so let's leave this at this level, and we will continue along at another time.
Sure. Okay.
So you can cut off the